Alright guys, today we are watching a video by YarnHub called When a Bf-109 Spared a Stricken B-17. So the Bf-109 is one of the German models, part of the Luftwaffe. The B-17, of course, being an American-made bomber. I believe the B-17 bomber was an American. I believe I might have heard of this story before, but I can't remember. I think I've heard of a time when American bombers helped escort a... Or wait, was that this story? Where I can't remember if I could be mixing this up. This could be the story. But I thought it was the other way around, where American pilot escorted a German pilot to the front lines because they were injured, or the plane was injured. I think it actually might be this story. But anyways, let's go ahead and watch it. See if it's the story that I'm thinking of.
December the 20th, 1943, and in the freezing air high above Germany, 2nd Lieutenant Charles Charlie Brown struggled to keep his mortally damaged American bomber on course. Brown had been wounded in the shoulder. His tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckie Eckenrode, was dead, and several other members of the crew were wounded, some severely. Their aircraft, B-17 Ye Old Pub, had been hit twice by flak as it approached its target, the Focke-Wulf plant in the German city of Bremen, forcing the crew to shut down one of the engines and throttle back on another. This had left it lagging behind the main formation of aircraft from the 379th Bombardment Group, and groups of German fighters had closed in like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Up to 15 fighters had attacked the bomber, and the whole tail section was shot to pieces. The nose cone was missing. The electrical, hydraulic, and oxygen systems were damaged. The radio was out, and the entrails of the crippled bomber flapped in the slipstream through gaping rents in the fuselage. But B-17s are tough old birds, and this one somehow kept on.
B-17s, they are famous, really, for... They were impressive, honestly, with what they could go through. I believe it was the B-17s as well that saw action in the Pacific Theater, in which they would fly back with so many holes in them. And it was like a miracle. Or, it looked as if a miracle happened to bring these pilots from their mission back to base, with the amount of holes that would be in these B-17 bombers. And I believe, what's his name? He was an Olympic level long distance runner that wrote a book on his experiences in the Pacific Theater, and he was part of a bomber squad in a plane that got shot down, but he of course ran numerous missions before they eventually got shot down over in the ocean. I can't remember his name. He had a movie about him that got adapted a few years ago. A good book too. I believe there were missions where they did return back to base with so many bullet holes in their plane and stuff. But yeah, 17 definitely. I think it's an understatement to call it a tough old bird. It's way tougher than that.
Flying despite the damage. Brown blacked out for a short time due to pain, loss of blood, and a lack of oxygen, and the bomber spiraled towards the ground. Brown came to and realized that the B-17 was only a few hundred feet above the ground. He somehow managed to get it back under control and turned west towards England in safety, 250 miles away. Brown wasn't able to coax the B-17 much above 1,000 feet, and he was vaguely aware that he had passed close to the perimeter of a German airfield. Soon after, he realized that a German Messerschmitt Bf-109 was flying in close formation beside him. It was so close that Brown could see the German pilot as he gestured towards the ground, telling Brown to set the bomber down. Most of the B-17's gunners were wounded. Only a few guns were still working, and none were able to shoot at the enemy fighter alongside. Brown could only look on at the German pilot and shake his head. For a short time, the Messerschmitt flew beside the bomber. Then it slid away above and behind. Brown waited for the gunfire that must mean the end of Ye Old Pub. But nothing happened. He realized to his astonishment that the German fighter was flying escort on the B-17. As they crossed the coastline and flew out over the North Sea, the fighter remained on station. Only when they were well out from the German coast did the fighter slide in again, close to the bomber. Brown looked across, and the German pilot looked back at him, raised a gloved hand in salute, and then swung his aircraft away back towards the east. Brown managed to put Ye Olde Pub on the ground, not at their home base in Cambridgeshire, but at an airbase of the 448th Bomb Group near Norfolk in East Anglia.
I really like stories like this because it really shows that human element in war that is very rarely talked about. Obviously, in recent times, it's become more and more discussed as we have channels I've reacted to before, like Memoirs of World War II, in which we are getting the personal tales of those that fought in the war. But like even micro histories like this, that's what this would be classified as, a micro history, because it's a very small event in a grander tale that honestly is not even a footnote in the tale of World War II. But yeah, it really shows the human element in that, and also shows, just really proves that, hey, not all these Germans were Nazis. There were Germans that were just conscripted and probably did not even want to fight. So yeah, really gives people that, lets people know that, because it is very easy to get lost up in the whole, I guess, passions and the stereotype. I don't know if that's really the right word, but, or in a sense, the propaganda, because obviously to get those willing to fight in World War II, you kind of had to demonize the enemy, and so you had to demonize even the average German soldier. So you know, that kind of persists still into the modern day mind, I think. But with more stories like this coming out, we start to get a better understanding of the individuals that were conscripted and took part in the Second World War.
He and all his crew, other than the tail gunner, survived. At debriefing, Brown told his story about the German fighter which escorted him. It was decided that this should be kept secret. The notion of an honorable German pilot choosing not to shoot down a damaged American bomber just didn't fit with the message that the US Air Force wanted to give out.
As I was saying about propaganda. As I was saying, because they needed more people to be willing to fight, and to really, you know, because obviously if you, there runs a risk of telling people about this honorable soldier, because then one, you might run into, say, you're fighting a group of SS, but you don't know that it's a group of SS. They may feign surrender, but you, in your mind, you may think of, you might remember that tale of the honorable German soldier. So that honorable German soldier image is in your mind, and you think that these SS officers, soldiers, will do the honorable thing and just comply with surrender. And then it turns out that they don't comply, and they manage to sneak weapons in as they feign surrender and kill possibly your entire squad. Which, by the way, is a true story that is at least recorded once, and I do not doubt that it has happened multiple times. It was certainly far more popular on the Japanese front, in which the Japanese did fake surrender to then be holding like a grenade behind their heads or something, which is shown in the miniseries Pacific. But yeah, there's also, when I'm talking, one of the displays of the German Nazis surrendering. I can't remember if it was an SS group or if it was just a group of German soldiers. But it was obviously a group of Germans that believed in the Hitler side and were loyal to that ideology. It was displayed in the series on Netflix called Medal of Honor. A great series too, by the way, because it does also display that personable story, albeit a very American side, because, you know, the Medal of Honor is an American medal for soldiers. but I think it's still a good series for anyone to enjoy. It's available in your country. But yeah, that there's a risk. There's definitely a risk during war to portray the enemy as honorable. So I can understand why they would not want that story to spread during war.
Charlie Brown survived the war, went home to go to college, and then rejoined the Air Force in 1949. He served until 1965, when he retired as a colonel. It wasn't until much later, in 1986, at a meeting of retired combat pilots called Gathering of the Eagles, that he first spoke about what had happened. The response was strong, though some questioned whether the whole incident really happened.
So I wonder then if how long the United States Air Force possibly pressured him into not telling the story. Let's see if the presenter here lets us know.
Even Brown began to wonder. His memories of that day in 1943 were hazy due to his injuries, exhaustion, and the stress of combat. Could he be remembering it all wrong? Brown decided that he was going to find the German pilot involved, if only to prove that he hadn't imagined the whole thing.
Okay, yes, this is the story that I was talking about at the beginning. I did have it mixed up. This is the story that I was thinking.
It took 4 years, but in 1990, Brown finally received a letter from a man named Stigler, who was living in Canada. Stigler explained that he had been the pilot of the German fighter who had escorted Ye Olde Pub. On December the 20th, 1943...
That is so crazy, like, how they both lived, honestly. Especially with... I mean, obviously that German pilot was fighting on the Western Front, so his chances of survival were much higher. His probability of survival was much higher for a German soldier on that side. But, you know, millions of Germans died, so it's quite a miracle that he was able to make it through the war.
Franz Stigler had been a 27-kill veteran pilot. He had flown against American bombers in his Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6 that morning, and he was refueling on the ground when Ye Olde Pub passed close by. He took off intending to shoot down the American bomber. However, as he closed with the limping aircraft, he could see just how badly it had been hit. He would later say that he had never seen a more severely damaged aircraft still flying. Stigler's commander had told his pilots never to fire at an enemy who was descending on a parachute. While the crew of Ye Olde Pub hadn't bailed out, they were clearly no longer capable of fighting, and Stigler decided that he could not bring himself to attack. Instead, he flew alongside and gestured to Brown to land. He just simply couldn't imagine that the crippled aircraft could possibly make it back to England. When Brown refused, Stigler made an extraordinary decision. Instead of shooting it down, he flew close formation with the B-17, hoping that this would deter flak batteries on the coast from firing at it. He flew with the bomber well out over the North Sea until it was clear of German airspace, and then left it to continue towards England. Stigler never told anyone about what had happened. Sparing an American bomber would likely have led to punishment and perhaps even execution.
Yes, because that would have been seen as treason, because the Americans were the enemy. And if he had, brought in the B-17 pilot and crew as prisoners, he wouldn't have gotten in trouble, for the most part, probably. But to let them go and to allow them to then fight another day against the Germans, that is, I think, technically, by literally, I think, certain definitions, people's definitions of treason, that is treason. And I think that definitely would be considered treason under the Nazi regime at this time.
But he often wondered if it had made it back to base. Stigler continued flying fighters throughout the war. In 1953, he emigrated from Germany to Canada, where he started a successful business. When he heard from Charlie Brown in 1990, Stigler confirmed every aspect of his story. Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown were astonished to discover that they had been living less than 200 miles apart for...
That's even crazier! Whoa! In such close proximity, too.
Much of the time since the war. Stigler had settled in Vancouver, British Columbia, while Brown was in Seattle, Washington. In the latter years, the two men remained close friends, often visiting and talking to other flyers about their shared experiences.
Such a wholesome story. I like it. That was a great video. I don't really have anything else to add. I mean, I really like these more positive stories because history is just full of the depressing and tragic histories, the murders, the genocide, the plagues, all the the racism, all that's highly prevalent in history. And I'm not saying that, you know, obviously that stuff shouldn't be discussed and chronicled and whatnot, but it's nice to get a relief, so to say, and experience a more positive tale. But yeah, I look forward to actually watching more videos from this channel, just based on the quality of this video. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to leave a suggestion down below as to what you'd like to see me react to next. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and have a good day. Thank you.